Hello everyone, my name is Jake Riley, and welcome to an encounter analysis of Titanfall 2's third mission, Blood and Rust. Titanfall 2 is a first-person shooter in which the player can freely swap between two different forms of combat, that being Titan and Pilot forms. In the context of the game, Blood and Rust is about a third of the way through the game, and the encounter we will be talking about is the first encounter of the mission. This comes after the player gets their feet wet with Titan combat in the first mission. The player approaches the encounter area after having received a communication from two militia pilots. The arena here is a straight path up a hill toward a facility with three buildings down the middle breaking up the area. This opening view also shows them the two allied Titans who they will be fighting alongside, while not showing the player who the allies are fighting. After dropping into the combat zone, the player sees the enemy for the first time in this stage. There are three Titan enemies in the area and one Swarmer enemy. The Titans themselves are the closer ranged Brutes and one longer ranged Tone. Tone is the first new Titan that the player encounters in the game, as Brutes were the first. Tone has multiple abilities that are new, such as a deployable shield that it can shoot from behind, a weapon that locks onto the player, and an ultimate ability that allows them to throw a barrage of rockets. The player will fight the Titans in the order in which they are seen, that being the two Brutes, then the Tone. Pushing up through the first concrete hill, two more Tone Titans are deployed and engage the player, and there are two Swarmer enemies hidden inside of a building firing at the player Titan with grenade launchers. The player at this junction can choose to either exit the Titan and acquire the weapons that these enemies are using, or continue the fightings in their own Titan. Either way, the player is being hit from an upper level by Swarmer enemies armed with rocket launchers. As they push past the Tones, one more Brute is deployed to the area to fight. After clearing the Brute and mopping up the smaller Swarmers, the player is cleared to move up to the next section of the level. What is particularly important about Titanfall 2's combat is the level of player freedom to approaching encounters. In order to get a scope of how this encounter can play out, I elected to play through it multiple times playing in different ways. The first being a Titan-only playthrough, the second being Pilot-only, and the third being a combination of the two. What I had noticed immediately when going through it this way was how the roles of the enemies switched depending on what state the player was in. For example, the Tone Titan, as I mentioned earlier. In Titan combat, it's a ranged enemy, but in Pilot combat, it's a heavy enemy. This is one of the most unique aspects of Titanfall 2's encounter design, because enemies fulfill multiple roles for different states of combat the player enters. The layout of the encounter is linear for the most part, with three tiers of verticality, almost like the player is pushing up a hill. There's three corrosive rivers that break up the different areas as well as their height. These rivers cause damage to the player when in Pilot form and don't when they are in their Titan state. The areas between the rivers have large reactor-like structures that create cover when the player is in Titan combat. Similar buildings are placed in the middle of the dividers between the rivers to a similar effect, allowing the player to have cover from both the dregs on the floor and the larger Titans fighting around them. However, there's something else that's important about these circular structures. They're hollow and have walls and holes on the inside. These are meant to be useful for the players who prefer the Pilot gameplay, and they can acquire the heavier weapons from the ranged enemies on the ground to fight the Titans while BT fights them hand to hand. This allows the player to fight how they want to, and approach their enemy in whatever way they see fit. The cloak ability of the player character also allows them to get up close and personal with the enemy Titans, while their Titan distracts them. Scattered through the area are some Titan batteries. These batteries are effectively health packs for the Titan. They all appear on the right side of the map, one in the beginning and three toward the end, allowing the player to repair their Titan after fighting the enemy if they happen to be low on health. The enemy Titans in this mode also can't stomp on the player like the player can crush the bodies of the grunts underfoot, further allowing the player to fight how they wish to. Playing as the Pilot against the Titans is much more difficult, as the player can't take as much punishment from the heavies as they could when in the Titan itself. The number of Titans that the player fights in this mission goes down as they fight, starting with 3, then going down to 2, then to 1, and the infantry that they fight goes from a lower amount to a higher amount the higher up they go. The layout does pose opportunities for flanking enemy Titans while your allies fight them. With the enemy Titan distracted by the larger threat, they are often quick to ignore the player when they are in their Pilot state. In terms of pacing and tension, the level's tension is at its highest when the player first arrives on the scene, and decreases as they fight up the hill. as when the player is in their Titan, the enemy Titans are the bigger threat. So the less of them that are on the field at a time, the lower the tension is and the faster the player can play. They think less carefully when they are fighting against hundreds of Swarmer enemies versus 10 enemy Titans. The environment enriches the roles each enemy fulfills. The Swarmer enemies are a lot smaller, so incorporating them into the level's design is important to make them a threat to the player, despite them being in a 3-story tall death machine. The Swarmers take cover behind trucks, canisters, in buildings, and in places that are generally harder for the player to reach while in their Titan state. Combat with the Titans in this level also allow the player to take cover behind larger structures, such as the cylindrical buildings, in order to break a line of sight from the other enemy Titans. The player can then set up a flanking route against the enemy Titan or engage them head-on. This encounter ends when the other pilots reach the top, and they tell you that you can move forward and they will secure the area.